many people get convicted even though they're innocent or they didn't do
Right.
anything on the books wrong.
Yep.
Why is that?
Well, part of it is just noise in the system. So specifically in this context, we're talking
Mhm.
about good guy cases of self-defense, right? Not criminals just making up self-defense, but someone's had to defend themselves against some kind of attack. They don't really know where the legal boundaries are. They may think they know, but in fact, they generally don't know what they're
Mhm.
allowed and not allowed to do. And the system itself is not well suited to deal with good guy cases of self defense. By the system, I mean the criminal justice system.
Right.
When you think of that phrase, criminal justice system, the most controlling word in that three-word phrase is system. It is a system, it's a machine, like a steampunk era machine with giant wheels and gears. It doesn't care about you personally, it doesn't care about fairness. It's just a bureaucratic machine for administering what we call justice, the rules of law to different people. And the second most operative term in that phrase, criminal justice system, is criminal. It's a system that's optimized to deal with criminals. For them, it does a pretty good job. But when you feed a normal law abiding person into that system, it generally doesn't go very well. And because the system's optimized for dealing with criminals, there's at least always a 10% chance that you'll get convicted if I have to put you in front of a jury. That's what we call the justice part of the criminal
Right.
justice system.
10%, that seems so high.
It's low. Many criminal defense attorneys will tell you it's higher because most criminal defense attorneys, their clients are actually criminals. That's the nature of the business.
Mhm.
For someone who has a criminal history who's put in front of a jury, they could be completely innocent of this particular charge. They're looking at more like a 50% chance of conviction. So, the most common criminal charge we're defending against is aggravated assault with a deadly weapon.
Okay.
We do murder cases, we do all level of cases, but the most common is aggravated assault with a deadly weapon because what happens is the client was facing something scary,
Mhm.
frightening them, and they're carrying a gun, legally carrying a gun, and they pulled their gun out and they pointed it at that person and they said, "Stay back. I'm prepared to defend myself," which sounds like perfect self defense, right?
Mhm.
That same conduct checks all the boxes for a criminal charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. What is assault? It's putting someone else in fear of harm. But
Mhm.
what are you doing when you're pointing a gun at someone? You're
Mhm.
putting them in fear of harm. You're
Mhm.
telling them, I will hurt you if you don't stop doing what's scaring me. It's aggravated because you're threatening them with deadly force harm, and it's with a deadly weapon because you're doing it with a gun. Collectively, in most states, that's good. That's a felony, good for 10 to 20 years in prison. Keep in mind, I'm talking about mothers, fathers, people who've never been in trouble with the law a day in their lives, are now looking at a 20-year felony sentence.
Mhm. Have you had any cases where maybe not you or like what are examples of cases that commonly innocent people end up going to prison? Like what's like a common case that might happen?
Well, it can happen in any case. Like I said,
Mhm.
there's at least a 10% chance, no matter how innocent you are, that you get convicted.
Mhm.
We have a very, very high success rate at law of self defense. We have almost 100% success in getting charges dismissed or people put into a diversion program.
Mhm.
So if they keep their nose clean for a certain period of time, the charges go away. Or if we go to trial, we have a very high rate of acquittals.
Mhm.
So we're pretty good at what we do. The cases that really trouble me is the ones where I actually see innocent people being convicted and going to prison, and they tend to be many of the high profile, politically energized cases out
Right.
there. The George Zimmerman case, the Kyle Rittenhouse case. Now, those two guys happened to get acquitted, but they were at risk of conviction. They would have spent the rest of their lives in jail. Uh, Derek Chauvin is another case.
Yeah.
There was reasonable doubt in that case, but he got convicted anyway, and he'll die in prison.
Then there was all these riots and they made it politically motivated. But somehow Zimmerman still got off, like he got acquitted, right?
Yeah, when I first looked at the case, I thought, well, surely there must be something from the prosecution here that would suggest guilt, because everything I'm seeing is totally consistent with lawful self defense. And there simply wasn't anything.
Mhm.
But what was happening was it became an opportunity for a local prosecutor who was having difficulty getting reelected in her black community.
Oh.
She had prosecuted a couple of cases involving black people that were very unpopular in the community. She was going to lose her reelection. And then she saw the opportunity with George Zimmerman and said, you know what? If I prosecute this
Oh.
guy for shooting that black high school student, I'll be in favor with the black community again. Now, George Zimmerman was acquitted. So that prosecutor lost that trial if you
Mhm.
define winning as getting a conviction. She didn't get a conviction.
Mhm.
But if you properly understand what motivated her, it was not to get a conviction, it was to get reelected. And that worked. When she was going to lose reelection, she prosecuted Zimmerman and she got reelected instead of losing.
So that's how politics get involved in the law
Okay.
because the prosecutors are elected,
Right.
right? And so then they have to be political.
That's correct.
Oh, so it's got to be heavily dependent on the prosecutor in your area too.
Right. So, in fact, the prosecutor in George Zimmerman's area,
Mhm.
he was pressured to bring charges against George Zimmerman and he quit. He resigned his job rather than prosecute George Zimmerman. So, the prosecutor who ended up taking the case was from a completely different part of Florida who
No
flew in
way.
to take over that case for political advantage.
How can they do that? Because isn't it based on where you are? I don't
Yeah, but
actually
once
know.
the original prosecutor quit, it left a vacuum. He needed to be replaced by somebody. And she
Oh.
raised her hand and got picked by the
And
governor.
oh, so the governor appointed her to go do it?
Essentially assigned her to go into that empty district and take over the prosecutor's
Oh,
role.
and because they made it like a race issue,
Right.
then the facts didn't even matter.
Right. So there's a cliche in the law, and it says if you're a lawyer and the law is on your side, you argue the law to the
Mhm.
jury. And if the facts are on your side, you argue the facts to the jury. And if
Mhm.
neither the law nor the facts are on your side, you pound the table. And so that whole prosecution was table pounding. The facts were not on their side. The law was not on their side. It was the cleanest case of self-defense I've ever seen brought to trial. Their prospects of actually getting a conviction was shockingly low, probably just that 10% that's noise in the system. So I don't
Mhm.
think they really had an expectation of getting a conviction, although it could, of course, happen.
Mhm.
The whole point was for her to win re-election. And in that respect, she won.
Right. And so it's almost like innocent people get like they're like innocent bystanders in the process where innocent people get thrown in jail because politicians are trying to get reelected.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they're just like a twig floating along the river. They're completely helpless.
And did you look at any of those cases super in depth? I'm just curious if you think that the cases they bring up were fair or no.
So the ultimate merits of the case are hard to know, right?
Yeah.
Whenever this guy did what he was charged with, I wasn't in the room, so I don't really know in any absolute sense what
Yeah.
happened. But I do know that when the defense is saying, "Hey, we have exculpatory evidence that's favorable to our client," and the state is arguing for that not to be admitted, that's
Mhm.
a problem.
Mm. Yeah, because you would think that would be illegal for them not to bring up evidence, right?
At a trial, it would be. It gets a
Mhm.
little squishier when we're talking about the appeals process.
Mhm.
But if you're a prosecutor and you're genuinely interested in justice and not
Right.
just a score, you seek justice by allowing the evidence in.
Right.
Right. So even when these people are acquitted, like George Zimmerman or Kyle Rittenhouse, so
Right.
they won, right? They're acquitted. They
Mhm.
walk out of the courtroom a free man. They were at risk of conviction.
Mhm.
The trials go on for weeks. And in the case of Zimmerman, it was like a year between the event and the trial.
Mhm.
So think about it. If you're like a 25-year-old guy, you're married, you're going to school, you're working a job, and this happens. And now your lawyer tells you, listen, in a year from now, we're going to go to trial and they're going to decide whether you spend the rest of your life in a cage. What do you do during that year? You still go get your 10 credits that year at the community college? Do you start a family? Do you have a child? Do you do anything substantive? Your life is frozen for that year and you never get that year back. So even if you have the best possible outcome and you get acquitted, you lost that year of your life
Mhm.
forever. In the case of George Zimmerman, he lost everything. He lost his job. He lost his wife. He lost, in a sense,
His wife left him?
his wife divorced him.
No way.
And I didn't know George at the time of the trial, but I've come to know George since then. He's just a genuinely nice guy, but he was traumatized.
Wait,
I mean,
you met him?
yeah.
No way.
Yep.
Really? Have you like had an interview with him or what did how
Not
do you
not
know him?
online, but I've talked with him about the case. I know the lawyers on his side from the case very, very well.
Wow.
Now they're good friends of mine. But George was so you hear about George after the trial, after the acquittal. Sometimes you'd see him in the news. He did something crazy.
Mhm.
Well, he was a broken man. He
Right.
had PTSD from that experience. You know, he wanted to be a prosecutor himself. That's what he was going to school for. And so, in his own mind, he's the good guy, right? He wants to be a good guy in society, keep society safe from evil predators. And the system tried to put him in a cage for the rest of his life for doing nothing wrong. And how long do you think George Zimmerman would have survived in general population in a Florida prison? Had he been convicted of being a racist murderer of a 13-year-old black boy for having iced tea and candy? Weeks, maybe.
Okay, so you were saying Breonna Taylor was awful. They're said in the chat it's
Right.
awful but lawful.
Yep, that's the phrase we
Mhm.
use. So it's not good, but it happens all the time because
Mhm.
Two people could be involved in a fight and they both legitimately think they're acting in self-defense. This happens a lot with police on police shootings, where they
Police
each
on
mistake the
police?
other, especially if they're in plain clothes. They're both in plain clothes. They're being told, hey, go find a guy who's walking around with a gun. And they turn a corner and there's a guy with a gun. It's another cop. And they shoot at each other. One of them kills the other. Under the law, the law of self-defense doesn't really care about what was actually happening. It's all about what was your reasonable perception when you fired that shot. And if you had a reasonable perception that you were facing an imminent deadly force threat, you can use deadly force in self-defense. You're not required to be correct in that assessment. We're not required to make perfect decisions in self-defense. We're only required to make reasonable decisions in self-defense. Mistakes are allowed as long as the mistakes are reasonable mistakes.